Hello and welcome everyone to the 17th episode of इस podcast को क्या नाम दूँ? Oh my god, 17 episodes. Rids and I probably we're just so grateful for the amount of love you all have shown, all our subscribers, all our viewers. Thank you so much for tuning in where we're talking about an episode on a show 10 years later. But yeah, before we start today's episode, just again a quick reminder to everyone. We hope everyone is staying safe, taking the vaccines as mandated in your countries. All our thoughts and prayers are for people in India and worldwide. We hope everyone is doing well. But yes, now back to our episode. We have a guest with us today. She is Leila, someone I have befriended with for a long time now, and I am so glad that she's here on this podcast. Leila, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm equally excited to be here. This is my first podcast, and I'm so glad we could finally sit down and find a time together where we can actually do this. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, the first question that we ask anyone on this podcast is how did you come across IPK?
So I actually found this when I was watching Mere Jab Hum Tum, I would say. And I already knew Sanaya from that show. And because I loved the show and the two sort of overlapped when they were first aired, yeah, I saw the clips on YouTube on the side in the suggestions. So I checked it out and actually started off with the funny scenes first. And that's how I actually got into the show. And then all the funny scenes where Khushi and Arnav make each other mad. If I were to refer to a specific scene, the one where she threw chai at him and then later on she went for an apology. So I started with those scenes and then eventually I got into it and started watching it regularly.
That was honestly one of the funniest things in IPK. And God bless that YouTube person who uploaded all the scenes. So many people on this podcast actually ended up watching IPK. Yeah, they ended up watching IPK because of that YouTube uploader, and now they have they have probably blocked that person's YouTube videos. But see, anyone from Star Plus listening to this, that is what got people into the show, not the promos, the YouTube videos.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we didn't even have Star Plus, and I mean, I don't know how others mostly watched at the time, but I would always watch it on YouTube, right? So, one, I guess, advantage of YouTube is that it always connects the shows and the different audience, and that's how I got into it. I don't think I would have gotten into a show like that on my own if someone had told me about it. And then I think my friend was also into it, and she's someone who loves stories with love hate relationships. And she used to watch it too, I think, at the time. And yeah, it was just something that became the topic of our discussions then.
That's interesting. So, today's track, we are going to be discussing the whole unfortunate track of where Lavanya turns desi. And, like, she starts wearing all chimkila clothes and everything and proposes to Arnav, and Arnav rejects that. Kushi and Arnav have this massive argument about what is marriage. And Kushi learns that Arnav is an orphan. We are up to the track where Kushi learns that it is Arnav's parents' Barsi. So, we'll begin with what we liked. I know all the viewers over here by this point know that if we start with what we liked, then we're going to have quite a lot to talk about what we disliked. But yeah, we'll start with what we liked, and for that, I'll just like to pick out on a few technical points. Aesthetically, there's just this one scene that really stood out is when the Lal Chunri, the pink fuchsia, I think, shade chunri, falls on Kushi's head. And it is so beautifully shot. Like, Sanaya has the most beautiful eyes, and this is also the time the artist had exactly the right kind of makeup on her. Like, less is more. So her eyes are all big and beautiful, and there are these very intimate close ups of her eyes, his eyes, dupatta, what it means, and it is absolutely stunning. And the rubber way that plays, it's so gorgeous. It's so gorgeous. And we also know that that rubber way is a little bit significant for both of them because while Arnav does not believe in any of that, what do you say, any of the crap that if the dupatta falls, then these two people, he's also surprised to see on who it falls on, and there's that moment of softness and tenderness. And likewise in like for Kushi also, I think I really like that moment because she's speaking and then she's stunned and she absorbs what she just said and the impact of it. And I think it's very beautiful how she slowly looks at him while looking at the butter.
I think just adding on to what you said, I think because like half the time the two are always having these heavy discussions, and even in this one I think they don't necessarily realize until after they've talked about whatever it is, all these big ideas. And for this one, the falling of the dupatta was like, them registering what we just said or what just happened, and it's like, all of a sudden puts them into a frenzy, like at which after which they require like a moment or two to sit down and let it sink and add all the points together to make sense out of a situation. So I think, and also because it was the way they were standing and the way it was framed, right? Because she's standing on the other side of the door, Lavanya in the middle, and then Arnav on the other side, and he throws it, but it falls on her. So it kind of puts Lavanya in a awkward situation, and that's almost like summarizing their story in a way, right? That she's there but she didn't really come in between on purpose. So it's really hard for me to put it into words, but I think the whole cinematography of that scene and many others, it was poetic, and it spoke volumes about their situation and feelings that they themselves didn't understand at the time, but they knew something was going on, something was changing.
Indeed, indeed. And the second scene that was very beautiful is it's after a scene that I don't really like a lot when Kushi, like, when Arnav threatens Kushi to show her what not having a character means, is when he goes, when the fuse box is out and Kushi is checking on it with Lavanya and Arnav follows her. And I really like it that they chose to keep that entire scene in the dark and then Kushi, she strikes a match and she lights the candle and the glow reflects on her face. And Arnav just stops. First of all, I love how they focus. I think one of the biggest strengths of the cinematography is they exactly know how to use their focus without overdoing it. Like it's almost never too intentional. It's not like here, look at a couple. It's like
Right, it's not too controlled, I would say. It's the intention is there, but it's also kind of let loose on purpose just so it could have that organic effect.
I love it where they don't overexpose characters, something that you can see in a lot of 2017, 2018 shows where there's so much of light that your eyes will bleed. So see
Yeah, it's almost too mechanical, I think, at that point.
exactly. So seeing a scene over here where everything is in darkness and the only we're supposed to assume the only source of light is the candle. It flickers so beautifully across Sanaya's face that it was genuinely stunning. It's a stunning moment, and their, I really love their choice of background over here. It's not too dramatic. It's almost light and instrumental in nature, so it highlights the moment. The simpler the elements are to.
Right. It needs to be elemental, I guess, in order for them to really feel it, right? I also think the fact that because it was in the poolside, it was the poolside is still very much his more than anyone else's in the house, I would say. It's open for everyone, anyone can come, but nobody does because it's closest to him and his bedroom, right? It's like an extension of his bedroom and his space. That's what I got from it. And the fact that there was a candle, the water was reflecting from the pool, it was night, Lavanya was there too. So I think there was that perfect amount of tension, but that flickering feeling as well.
Indeed. And Kushi with a candle always reminds me of a moth attracted to a flame.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then I'm done with my technical points. Now we're going to other things that we liked in this show. Leila, why don't you go first?
There was so much tension between Arnab and Khushi. Khushi was still um, mindful of the things she did that were considered wrong inherently on her part, which was being rude to him. Because in her head, he can do whatever he wants, but she still does not have the right to be rude to him, even if she does talk back. So it's kind of like she doesn't want to be suppressed, she doesn't want to be used as a doormat, but she also doesn't want to be rude, right? And because Khushi is shown to be such a young girl, she can't really find the balance, but she has that intention to be in that balance that I think a lot of us try to do as well, right? You want to be firm, but you don't want to be too weak. You don't want to be, too rude or anything of that sort. So I think we saw a glimpse of that. So that was really good. And then when Erna finds out about her parents indirectly, that was good because if he had found out earlier and without this interaction, it wouldn't have been as impactful. And the fact that he found out about her parents at his parents' death anniversary, I think it just hit him right on the spot, which made him later apologize. And for me, that was a really good moment because from the beginning, I wouldn't expect him to ever apologize for anything because he had this personality that I can never be wrong. So for him to say sorry to a girl who he always looked down upon, I think that was a really big point in the show, in his life, and in his character development.
I think I absolutely agree about your point of Kushi seeking apologies when she makes a mistake. I think uh, it makes Kushi very human because we have this whole problem in the second half of the show where Kushi is whitewashed into a moral, ethical deity and she cannot make any mistake. And I think that makes her very flat as a character in the second half. But over here, I really like that Kushi trips, she makes mistakes, and she's constantly trying to achieve that balance. Some of the other things that I love in this track in general is I just putting out there, I love Mommy because her comic timing is out of this world. Like I think that's a constant, like in all the shows. In all the episodes, I'll only point out in certain moments when she crosses a line, but in general, her dialogues, her comedy, and then some of the other things that I absolutely love is overall I really like Shashi and Kushi's bond in the episodes. It is beautiful. Shashi and Kushi, the way a protective father. This is a character who we really miss a lot in the second half of the show because this character, he's so protective of Kushi. He loves her. He'll do anything to be and support his daughter. Like it does not matter for him that Sham is showing interest in Kushi. Shashi knows that Kushi is not reciprocating that interest, and that is very important. So she rocks. He is the perfect feminist father.
Yeah, yeah.
So he,
And I think he was the only one who, because everyone else in the family, for example, Buaji and um, Garima, they were just so distracted by the fact that there's a guy who wants to marry her despite that scandal, that they couldn't think past that. But Shashi, he could actually think about things that the whole family wasn't, right? So it's like finding those moments in the chaos that that are actually needed, right? That could, it's like for looking into the future and seeing what could go wrong when no one's talking about it. So he actually stepped out of that chaos.
true. And some of the other things, like just in connection with the whole Shashi thing, I really like it that he's a constant character who is suspicious of what Sham is doing. So he's basically the audience. Sham is my ultimate favorite. He one of the best villains that I've seen. So I think I really like the way Sham would cover his footsteps, making adjustments here and there. And I also like how he, at times, he would get careless in the process. Like, okay, we know later on that all of this was kind of useless because Sham really does not get revealed until a long time later. So it's frustrating. But for now, it almost feels like Sham is right at the edge of being caught. So there is that excitement that's being built. And there, I love related to Shashi and Sham and the whole thing. I like that on the other end, Anjali is noticing how absent Sham is becoming and creating a discord in the marriage. And this was so important because, again, midway into the show, we have Anjali becoming blind in devotion for Sham. I never required Anjali to question Sham where he is or anything, but I really appreciated the moments they showed that Anjali knew something was off, but she would control herself before she would question Sham about any of this. I really liked that. And now coming back to Arnav and Khushi, what did I like about these two? I understand Arnav's anger on his parents' Barsi because I went like, oh hell no, when Khushi said, oh, even Arnav is doing puja, and she's like, oh shit, it's his parents' anniversary. I really like it. His anger is very justified there. Also, what I really liked about his whole parents' death and everything is that Arnav learns about Khushi being an orphan in the least, how do I say, least contrived way possible. Like, it does not look like Khushi is telling that to relate with him or anything. It's another fact. It's another fact of her life. And I absolutely love it that Khushi learning about Arnav being a good guy, like buying pigeons for a little girl, or knowing that he has also suffered the same trauma. While it makes Khushi aware that Arnav is not completely who she thinks he is, it's also pretty much the same. Like the dynamics don't shift a lot. And I think that is very necessary because television shows often go through like this one act of goodness or this one trauma completely justifies a person. That's not the case for Arnav and Khushi. What I genuinely love is that Khushi has an internal shift of how she views Arnav. She realizes that she's been viewing him in a very 2D version. And she realizes that there is more about this person and she should think twice before trying to understand what kind of human being he is. I also absolutely love the fact that Khushi does not change in how she treats him, although she probably understands him.
I think the confusion that was always there regarding his personality and regarding how he is as a person, um, and just like whether he's a good person, whether he's an evil guy, because that's how she took him at one point, right? I think it's very natural because if you think about it, even in real life, it's like this is like it takes us a while to completely make a strong opinion about someone, um, because either we think very highly of them and then there are these pockets of moments where they're acting the opposite, right? Or we just label them as this crazy person or this negative person, and then we see these moments where they are the opposite of that. So I think that's what happened with her, where she would see him like completely unexpected, and even I guess he just does it out of habit or whatever you may call it, but um, like sort of in an unplanned way would just try to help someone. um, and I think even for Arnav, because he has spent so much time building these walls around him, that he doesn't realize that the goodness in him is coming out, because in his head he's still that CEO, that crazy guy, that someone, um, the rich guy who can control everything. So I think that was very human, because a lot of times we end up doing things we don't understand, but it just comes out as just for because you're human.
Yes. And I think one thing the whole Barsi track does very well is show us where Arnav's anger is justified and where he crosses that line. I think they do a really brilliant job of showing that Arnav ignoring Khushi, Arnav being angry, Arnav being upset that someone is trying to sympathize with him, even though he's telling that person to step away, is very natural. And it's also very natural to show that even though Khushi is trying to sympathize with him, trying to tell him that she sees his mother's eyes in him, like she does not know the circumstance of the death, right? She does not know the personal relationships. She is projecting her own pain and what she would believe is important to her to him to kind of help him out. So I think his anger over there is very nice, and they show that he crosses a line when he thinks he's the only person who might have suffered this fate, or when he takes it down to assassinate her character, telling her that she might be crying or empathizing to get more money. Like, I really like how they show the distinction between where his anger was valid and where he crossed a line.
Yeah, like I like how it wasn't just like, back to back. There was that processing time that usually a person requires for self-reflection.
Exactly, that is there. And I absolutely love this scene where Arnav sees this little child crying, gives her his hanky. She blows her nose into it, and he's kind of like, "Ugh." It is so beautiful. I think that whole scene was so wholesome to see that little child give Arnav a kiss on his cheek and just like go away. And I can totally say that he put Aman onto task of finding where her father is and paid for his hospital bills and everything. Like, pretty much that happened. We're pretty sure that happened. I think what I really loved about that scene is that we are seeing a different side of Arnav, but again, it's not a different personality. I like it that this moment is tied into like several months later when they're going to get remarried, where she's like, I know I saw you at the temple, and he's surprised. He's like, oh, okay. And I really love it how it's interwoven later, because this is the scene. Like, if we ever had to pick a scene and be like, when did Khushi change her opinion of Arnav? We can pinpoint it to this scene, and it was very beautifully done. And I think the way the child asked about where are your parents, the way the kid was, I wanted them to adopt that kid later instead of just like go and find that kid, adopt that child. That child is so cute. And yeah, that completes my list of everything I liked in this track. Oh, how could I forget the most important thing? I think I absolutely loved Kushi and Lavanya's friendship.
Yeah, yeah. The way it changed over time.
Them dancing to a hero to his hero, like,
Yeah.
I think Lavanya truly finds a friend who she can be crazy with, because there's almost everyone expecting some kind of behavior, or they have some kind of expectation, and then there's Khushi who's like, be silly with me.
Yeah,
Is
yeah. And that's, I guess, like even before like before she even met Kushi, she was, like acting a certain way because of all these societal pressures of wanting a certain lifestyle, right? Or being in a relationship with a certain type of person. You have to do this, you have to do that. But I wish she had made a comeback later on, and maybe the three of them had some conversation.
all right, I think then this is the perfect time for us to shift to things we did not like. I just start with the technical things. One thing that is very visible over here is I don't know what happened. I don't know if their cameras broke or something for a day, or if the editor did something. But for there's a set of episodes that are extremely saturated, have very sharp contrast, their exposure is off, and for some reason, those few episodes, they looked cheap. I don't know. I think, I mean, we're spoiled. At this point, we're spoiled with a certain kind of production level and aesthetic and camera quality. It's like as if they were using the cameras that was being used for Saath Nibhana Satya. I don't know what happened, because they were like very at that point of time in 2010, 2011, it was very saturated. So, but yeah, coming to other dislikes, Leila, do you want to quickly rattle off what all you disliked?
I think like these, just kind of piggybacking on the technical issues that you mentioned, I think there were times when I just something was off with Arnav's look or Khushi's look, and that really threw me off because there were times when their looks were on point. For example, Arnav always had this hairstyle, but it changed drastically by the end, and a lot of times you could tell it just wasn't. He got ready in a rush or something, and I think for a very strong character like Arnav, you have to be mindful of these things, and it usually comes from the director. Like he just he needs to be very very critical of these things, because I think for Arnav, like, it makes all the difference, right? Because his movements and his words are very subtle for the most part, and they're impactful that way. But if these things are off, then it's like it makes me uncomfortable. I think Arnav's flare ups, but I guess that was just his character, the way it was. It was more of a personal thing that I didn't like. But I think that's something that everyone has with Arnav. His character was just so strong and powerful in that way that normal people do get a bit annoyed by certain things he does or says.
So some of the things that I disliked about this track is I hated what outfits Lavanya came up with. Did not understand for the life of me why Lavanya would turn into Khushi 2.0. I get it that she's being guided by Khushi. Again, a very like probably the biggest turn off for me in IPK was Lavanya dressing up as another Khushi. Like even her materials, I was just like, why can't she be wearing like chiffon anarkalis or like like of
See, I think it just looked like she's slapping outfits on her, but it could have been like a joint decision between Khushi and Lavanya. So it could have, like, the outfits could speak for that. I mean, if Lavanya, it's a no brainer. Lavanya has been into fashion, right? So she would have some say in this matter, right? But it seemed like it was completely gone, and she was just blindly listening to her. So I do see where you're coming from, and I do also wish that she did have a bit more of a say in this whole matter.
Yes, and it was very problematically done because it did not look. We never got a scene where we see that Lavanya is actually interested in dressing up a certain way, but she restrains herself, or that she actually likes the chimkila factor and she does want to wear clothes like that. We don't get any of that, and I hated how much Kushi interfered in this relationship that we get over here.
It was too much for sure. I mean, in this point, I think Arnold's reaction is completely justified. I would do something like that too, right? Like, influence and guidance is one thing, but completely meddling is another thing, which she was doing. And I think it was to a point where it seemed like Hoshi was more active in the relationship than Lavanya.
Yeah,
So
and which is precisely why I hate the way Lavanya proposes Arnav. Is I My sympathies for that guy, because first of all, Arnav, how much ever whatever his feelings are for Lavanya is for Lavanya Kashyap, the woman who understands him, the woman with whom he has an unsaid agreement, and someone who gets his point of view of the world. So it is terrible because at no point has Lavanya had an actual conversation with Arnav with regards to strengthening their relationship or moving forward with it. And then he just bombards him in the middle, in front of his whole family. Will you marry me? That too in a proposal not written by her. It's written by Kashi.
exactly. And I think it's like it would be justified if Arnav's not just angry but also hurt, because the things that are being thrown at him aren't, truly from the person who is throwing them at him, right? Like, if it's, it's an insult at his love. Let's say he was in love with her genuinely, right? And I think it would have made sense if, let's say, Khushi is putting this idea into Lavanya's head that, oh, you should get married and not just do a live-in. But how that proposal is executed should have been only and only Lavanya's idea, because I'm sure she had something in mind when she was his girlfriend, right? So the proposal should have reflected that, Lavanya.
Exactly. And the whole Lavanya ko desi bana or Lavanya's entire thing to marry Arnav should have come from it. That should have been Lavanya's own decision. I completely hated it as to how they made Lavanya as Khushi's minion in these
Exactly. It was more like a puppet. And it's like he literally resents that woman. And now he has to deal with two of them.
yeah, and it's like more than resentment. I can get why Arnav. You see, we understand that Arnav knows that he's attracted to Khushi, but he also knows that given their difference of thought, there is no plausible way. Like, I don't think Arnav ever considers him and Khushi as a possibility of being together
At that point.
at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is, at no point does Arnav even think that he and Khushi can be a couple. Like, he knows he's attracted.
And I think he was trying to deal with all that mess like already. And then it's already bad enough that he has to deal with his interaction and attraction with Hushi. And now Lavanya's there, who he's also trying to understand his equation with her, but because she's acting like Hushi, it makes things even more complex, right? Like he's it's really hard for him to wrap his head around the whole situation. So and he's doing what he does best.
And I find the proposal to be violating Arnav's consent in so many ways. I found it like if because
Like you don't propose without a conversation.
yes, you propose without a conversation. That too, you don't propose in private. You propose in front of all the family members who have been pressurizing him to get married for a long time. And one of the dialogues that I absolutely hate is when Lavanya is upset that I'm. First of all, I really marvel the way Arnav handled it in public. Arnav does not say anything. He just walks away and he's like, we'll talk about this later. But one of the things that I absolutely hate is when Lavanya consults Kushi and then consults Anjali, like when she consults both of these women, the other women are like, well, if he didn't say yes, he didn't even say no. So there might be like, he did not refuse.
It's like she like whatever she's doing, it's more to please the family members than him. And it's like it would obviously push him away from her because he never liked the traditions and the ways that his family followed in the first place. Hence he wanted to do live-in instead of marriage that his family proposed, right? But now the girl who he liked is more like the family he didn't hate, but like he didn't like their ways, or he wasn't like them. So now he's like, it's I think it makes perfect sense for him to walk away from her, right? And it's like every point of the way she's constantly poking at him with this thing that, oh, let's do this, let's do that, but it's all for the family and not necessarily for him, which is kind of like, how some of the arranged marriages happen.
Yeah, and I feel Anna's reaction would have been softer if this was a very private conversation where Lavanya told him that she does see a future and she wants to ask him if he sees a future as well. I think that would have been a conversation that would have had a much better outcome. This one was very poorly written, if you ask me, and I hated that they try to portray that Arnav is a villain for refusing the marriage. Where I'm just like, if I was in a relationship, I don't want to get married. My boyfriend changes like overnight and then bombards me with this question. Like when, and also Arnav has made it very specific that he does not want to think about marriage.
Exactly. And now even more so because the person he liked isn't even the same person anymore.
And what really hurts me is that in this whole equation, they're not considering what has been Arnav and Lavanya's relationship. They think they can change Arnav overnight, which
Exactly. I think this is a point where, someone from the family should have sat down with Arnav or Lavanya, and I think more so Lavanya, and just like kind of had that conversation that um, kind of like from a neutral point of view, that this is what you guys were before, this is what's happening, just like think about this or think about that, instead of just kind of pulling all sorts of theatrics at him.
exactly. And while as much as I understand Arnav in this whole sequence, there is only one moment that I did not love about him. So one thing about IPK that I generally appreciate is Arnav and Khushi's relationship, apart from a very few specific scenes, is very mutual. It has a lot of consent, and they both are attracted to each other, and they both allow each other into their private spaces. It is unsaid. It's an unsaid haq that they a right that they extend to each other. But then there are few scenes that is very problematic, and I hate it when people romanticize it. One of them is this scene that happens when Arnav wants to talk to Khushi this whole about the misleading Lavanya into marriage, because he knows very well that Khushi is the one who has been misleading Lavanya correctly. So, because at no point are we seeing that Lavanya herself is invested into this. We see her becoming enamored with Khushi's idea of marriage. We are never given a clear picture that this is something Lavanya herself wants to invest in. So, what I don't like about this scene is Kushi enters the house. No one is there at home except Arnav, and he's like, slowly okay, I get it. He tries to talk to her. She tries to evade it, and I'm like, if Kushi knew she did not do anything wrong, she would have had a full-fledged conversation with him. While I hated whatever Kushi did, he corners her. He prevents her from leaving the room by closing the door, closing the windows. It is very problematic, and it bordered on sexual harassment. I think it was harassment completely, because again, Kushi is very wrong to call him characterless only because he does not fit into the stereotypical expectations of society from a man. I would so be with Arnav if he yelled at her and he's like, how dare you call me characterless? The fact that Arnav responds with grabbing Kushi's hand, pulling her in at a very uncomfortable distance, he is way stronger than Kushi, and knows that, and he was flexing that because Kushi could not get out of his grasp. And then there's this one moment where he pulls her even close, body to body, front to front, and just like, I'm just saying that is so horrific. And he's like, I'll show you what's character. Like his voice goes down to a whisper, and he's like, I'll show.
Yeah, I remember that. And I hated him in that moment.
And Kushi has to start crying, and she's like, oh no, I did not mean that. And he's like, what did you not mean? Then he lets her go, and that is harassment.
And I think if he wanted to create that horror and that terror in her and scare her or threaten her, it could have been done outside of the harassment
No,
factor,
you see,
right?
Lala, I don't see the point of him even terrifying her. Like, what does he want to say?
But I mean, looking from his perspective,
Even from his perspective, like, I could completely get Arnav saying that with, what are you calling me characterless? How can you, like, he can judge on what it means about Kushi's moral.
idea or, yeah, definition of
Yeah,
characterless.
yeah, if she calls people characterless, like, just because he has not quote unquote misbehaved with her yet, it does not mean he's not characterless. The fact that that is the response he had very much shows what kind of a man he can be. And it was terrible. I have always appreciated when Arnav averted his eyes when Khushi was uncomfortable or things like that.
Right, right, right.
This particular scene I completely could not digest, because he like really gets her into a very uncomfortable, intimate.
And the fact that it was in his room, it was just terrifying. It could have been, I guess, like, I mean, I still don't like the fact that he had to twist her wrist like that, but um, I think yelling alone, just trying to clarify my point from before, yelling alone could have terrified her, and it would have had the same effect he was trying to do without scaring her in the harassment. Um, how do I say this? Like without causing, because there were two fears, right? Like one fear was that he's definitely like obviously angry because of what she's done, but then what he might do in response to that. So there were these two fears. I mean, I could see in Khushi's head, um, but I think he could have just yelled at her and caused that one fear instead of the harassment fear, and that would have been enough.
Yep. No, that is. And what I absolutely hate is, one, he leaves bruises on her again.
Yeah. Yeah,
Bruises that stay for a long time. Like if any bruise does not go in 5 minutes, then his grip was brutal.
for sure. Yeah.
And they had a rub away play over those bruises. And Arnav's just like quiet reflection on what he did. And I'm just like, no, he harassed a woman. Does that even count?
No, I think he should have thought about it way more than that. Like it should have impacted her, and especially because he's shown to be this sensitive guy, then he should have thought about it like over and over, right? Like if 24 hours later the bruises are still there, and like I'm for right now I'm thinking of that scene where he held her arm when he was trying to apologize and she just didn't want to talk to him, and then the next day he saw the bruises. So it's just mind boggling because those bruises weren't even there because of his anger, they were there because he was trying to apologize. So it just doesn't add up in your head, right? Like if he can be so aggressive while he's trying to make things up, imagine how crazy it would be if he was hating on her at that point, right? And he should have thought about that. Like no amount of stories are enough unless you actually fix that. And I really do wish they had some sort of conversation later on when they were married, or some sort of reflection that these were the damages that need to be healed.
Yeah, and in short, he made her feel unsafe. And that is
Yeah,
not the kind of a guy you want to marry. If at any
exactly. And there was no mention of it later, or like it's like when she fell in love with him, everything was just out the window. Like I get it, you can still, I think you can acknowledge both things, that yeah, I do have feelings for this guy, but at the same time he has these aggressive traits that I can't unsee,
like how
right?
do I say, during the whole guest house episode when they're both yelling at each other's faces and she faints and when all of that drama even happens, they're at very close distance. Like they're very close, like right up, like they're right at each other's faces when they're like yelling. But at no point are both of them uncomfortable with that distance, with the lack of distance. So it makes that moment acceptable. But over here, I I have to delete this memory from my head to to have them end up together. Like this is yeah, no. Harassment is not good. Another thing I forgot to mention about what I liked is I absolutely love Arnav and Anjali's bond. I think that moment when he hugs her and because he's terrified of his parents' death, I think it was so beautifully done. Like he literally.
At least some, like, shows how that child is still there.
Yes, yes. And I absolutely loved Anjali and Khushi's conversation. Like how much strength. I truly marveled at Anjali's strength that it's the day her parents died, but still has the strength to console somebody else. That was beautiful.
I think Anjali is that person who also connects Khushi and Arnav in a way. Like she was always that, I guess, mode of communication when things were too heated between them to have a straight conversation. And I think Anjali was very well aware that she's that link between the two, and she had the power to reconcile and make things better between the two. So I think I really like that, like as opposed to the typical sister-in-law relationships that we are so used to seeing.
Yeah, that's true. Now I think we can come to a point of focus, which is going to be about the whole concept of marriage that they sell over here. From Lavanya proposing to Arnav to like this whole marriage argument that Arnav and Khushi have. It's very clear that the show is promoting the basic thing that marriage is the righteous thing to do, and anyone who does not abide by these rules are is someone who's flawed or someone who needs to be corrected. And I find it very interesting because when Arnav has that argument with Kushi, he puts the whole blame of marriage on her, and Kushi responds with, marriage is not an idea that I created. It two people have trust and faith and they want to spend their life with each other. I found that very valid. Like the institution of marriage, I think I found that really right. What I found problematic in this whole thing is one, the judgment that anyone not following marriage is characterless or is a terrible human being or anything, when in general Arnav is someone I can empathize with, because Arnav's lack of belief in marriage does not stem from him insulting that institution, because he idolizes Sham and Anjali. He idolizes what they share. He has a lot of love for anyone. Like, Arnav does not even hesitate when Payal and Akash want to get together. That's not his thing. His disbelief in marriage stems from a very traumatic memory. So I find it very strange that they try to paint him as a villain when it comes to marriage, when in reality, for him, it's probably not the right decision. What are your thoughts on this?
I think, like, I agree with what you've said, but I also think, it's also the fact that he's not necessarily opposing marriage because he has something against it, but yes, his traumatic experience has, like, plays a part for sure. But I think it also has to do with the fact that he's not going to get married unless he feels the need to, right? Like, if he thinks he can get that companionship, that partnership in a live-in relationship, then he won't bother with the marriage, especially because he doesn't believe in all of those rituals and sermons and all those things. The day he starts believing in them, the day he thinks it plays some sort of value, then he will go through with it. But right now, it's the idea doesn't appeal to him because he simply doesn't see any value in it, right? Why do you need to sign the contract when you can just choose to live? And it's for him, it's not that, oh, just because you signed that marriage contract, you're automatically this person who who's loyal and who becomes the best spouse and whatever, right? It has to come from within you, and you shouldn't be relying on a contract for that.
I think that's very wonderfully put. Yes, I think that indeed summarizes marriage. I think my one of my biggest gripes with the way this show deals with marriage is, I mean, one thing I find that maybe they were making a commentary on marriage because two women who blindly believe in the institution are Anjali and Khushi, and they both have terrible marriages. And on the flip side, Arnav, who really does not put much importance into it, ends up finding his happily ever after. He's comfortable with his partner, and Lavanya, who was trying to compensate for the lack of emotional connect in the relationship and trying to enforce the marriage, also ends up breaking up with that partner. So I maybe on a larger scale, there was a commentary on what marriage is truly about, which is the companionship.
Yeah, and I think it was sort of an eye opener for Hushi too, that just because you're in this contract doesn't automatically make things blissful for you, right? It 100% depends on the person and their nature. So it could also go to the other extreme, whereas people think just because I'm in a contract, I have the license to do anything and everything I want, which Hushi sort of believed, right? She didn't really think upon it too much, but she believed that, oh, because just because I'm married to someone, I have to, always put them first, always, like, stick to it, whatever, no matter what. But I think fate sort of showed her that it could be the other way around too, right? So you may not want to go into it blindly. Like, she sort of had that idea before.
Correct, correct. Yeah, so maybe on the whole, on a larger scale, IPK was kind of giving us a different commentary, because we say that Khushi's it's a funny way to see that Khushi's judgment of Arnav not wanting to marry, weighs with more her family pressurizes her to marry Sham. Like, she slowly and gradually gets into understanding this whole thing, that perhaps, like, just because someone finds you marriageable and someone finds this other person that everyone else is telling you to marry, it might not be the right decision. So I found that change very interesting. But over here, like, the main clash of ideologies that Arnav and Khushi have is basically like the crux of their difference. Arnav goes upon thinking that you have put this in Lavanya's brain, you have done this, you are responsible. It's also a very interesting way as to how Arnav deals with problem. Like he narrows it down to one person, and Khushi just breaks that. I think I always loved the way Arnav and Khushi argued pre-marriage because he would say XYZ and she would respond with fact, fact, fact. And she'd be like, I did not create marriage. I could have told Lavanya about it. Like, what really matters is she's interested in it. Like, I did not do it. And probably you don't understand what marriage is. Marriage is true companionship.
Right, but I think she sees the world very like in a linear way, versus the way he sees it, right? Um, for her, it was like, okay, like the way she has been raised, she used to think the whole world functions like that and there are no alternatives. Things are always like this. If you get married, this, like, because her parents taught her that the only way to be with someone is marriage, that's how things should be, and that's how things will only work out in other people's lives as well. So she puts her opinion as a matter of fact. But like, and I think, yes, we agree that she didn't create this institution of marriage, but the way she's presenting it, she's not presenting it the way marriage is. She's presenting it the way she thinks marriage is.
Indeed. I think that is, again, it's a very justifiable argument because you have two opinions of what marriage can be. That whole contradiction was beautifully done until Arnav goes a step ahead and does that crappy thing. I think that was a very beautiful argument, and you see how Khushi's opinion and even Arnav's, like they, it mellows and changes over time until again she gets whitewashed into this moral dilemma who thinks it's right to bring Sham back because he is Anjali's husband. I don't consider that Khushi canon, but I think for food for thought, it's a very interesting way of seeing marriage as a wholesome companionship between two people who want to pursue that kind of commitment with each other. And it's not the only way to commit to another person. So,
Yeah. And I think it was very um, interesting the way things changed both for Arnav and Khushi after the marriage. For Khushi, it was like, marriage can be a beautiful thing, but it can also be a terrible thing, right? Depending on your circumstance and the person you are sort of stuck with. And how painful it can be, because now, like, a lot of people in, like, if you think about it, in the real world, start to live double lives because of the kind of marriage they're in, right? And all of a sudden you have so much pressure because um, being in a non-marriage relationship is one thing, and it's much easier to go in and out of that than being in a marriage, right? It just has that societal pressure regardless of what you think it is, right? So an individual would always feel that pressure. And for Arnav, he never looked at marriage in that light. But afterwards, when he lived with her, even though he hated her at the beginning, but the way things changed, he got used to having someone at home. And even though she was doing this to annoy him, he just so started feeling like a married man, right? Like having arguments with your wife and her being annoying and whatnot. He started being open to this idea that it may not be the worst thing after all. And this is what companionship actually looks like, once practiced. Yeah, so I think it does happen in real life too, right? Like when people are scared of marriage, but when they get married, they see how it is. And a lot of times our thoughts are um, scarier than the actual situation, which I think may have happened somewhere down the road with Arnav, right? Like he hates Khushi, but then he sees all these sides of her that he didn't see before. And he starts to reanalyze her character in his head, even though he's still trying to hate her. But he learns all these little things about her that you only learn once you live with the person.
mhm. Indeed, indeed. And I think IPK is also not so linear when it tries to battle as to what opinion
It's
is
so
valid.
multifaceted. You, it's really hard to,
It's
yeah.
really dependent on how people perceive it to be. Like on a very direct scale, then yes, they are saying that marriage is the true optimum. But if you see anyone who has chased marriage because it is society, like it is right according to society, have actually ended up with a breakup or with terrible marriages. So it's a thought. But yeah, thank you so much, Leila. Thank you so much for being a part of the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It was so wonderful to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, but thank you. Thank you to everyone who heard us. Thank you for all the subscribers. Thank you, guys. It is always exciting to see another new subscriber to the channel. Let us know what all you'd like to hear from us. But that's all. Thank you.